I have definitely fallen into the trap of working harder, not smarter, or to your point of working both hard and smart. And I think a lot of people who had day jobs, we're taught to work hard, to fit more into a day, to get as much done as possible. So when it comes time for us to work for ourselves, there's this belief that if we're not trying to do everything, we are not working hard enough.
Hello, fellow creative voyagers. This week on the Indy Author podcast, I talk with Diane Vallere about working harder, working smarter, including the trap of busy work, the danger of getting caught on autopilot, how small tasks can add up to big chunks of time, and the importance of always assigning value to your time, pursuing a minimum viable product, understanding what you're doing for your audience, what you're doing for yourself, considering the indirect as well as the direct value of your work, when outsourcing is the smart option, and when doing nothing is sometimes the smart choice. And now let's hear from Diane Vallere about working harder, working smarter. Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Diane Vallere. Hey, Diane, how are you doing?
Great. How are you, Matty?
I'm doing great. And just to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, national bestselling author Diane Vallere writes funny and fashionable character-based mysteries. After 2 decades in luxury retailing, she traded fashion accessories for accessories to murder. As past president of the National Sisters in Crime Organization, she edited the Agatha-Award-winning essay collection PROMOPHOBIA, taking the mystery out of promoting crime fiction. Diane started her own detective agency at age 10 and has maintained a passion for shoes, clues, and clothes ever since. And Diane was last a guest on episode 251, Strategic Self-Doubt and the Indy Mindset. And that had come about just because I had some mindset related thing I wanted to talk about. And I got in touch with Diane and said, Diane, do you want to talk about this? And she did, fortunately. And so the same thing came up this time. So I had been talking with Nicholas Harvey. He was in episode 256, Lessons from the Nomadic Author, and we were both sort of admitting to being workaholics. And after I had that conversation with Nick, I was thinking about that whole idea of being a workaholic and the work harder, work smarter. You know, you often hear it as don't work harder, work smarter, but is that really true? And so I thought, you know who I want to talk about that with? Diane. So we're going to be talking about working harder and working smarter. And I'm sort of framing this up as not necessarily the either or, because I have to say my philosophy is I like to work harder and smarter. I figure I get double benefit if I do both of them. But
That
Diane,
is true.
I wanted to start out the conversation asking you what your sort of philosophy is in the working harder, working smarter arena.
Well, first off, thank you for inviting me back. I love talking about indie author mindset things. I think this is often the thing that authors forget about. We look at craft, we look at marketing, we write books, but we don't think about if we believe that we can do what we're setting out to do, or how big our dreams are, or where we're limiting ourselves. So I think this is an endless conversation. There's so much to cover here. So I have definitely fallen into the trap of working harder, not smarter, or to your point of working both hard and smart. And I think a lot of people who had day jobs, we're taught to work hard, to fit more into a day, to get as much done as possible. So when it comes time for us to work for ourselves, there's this belief that if we're not trying to do everything, we are not working hard enough. And anybody who's done this indie thing knows there's always something else to do. There's always something that you think, oh, someday I'll get to that. I'll redo my automation sequence on my newsletter, or I will change up my covers, or I'll redo my back matter. There's always something. So I have definitely had those days when I'm up till like 2:00 in the morning trying to squeeze in the end of one last project before I go to bed to feel that sense of completion. I've gotten to a point where I realize maybe those things don't make a big enough difference for me to be prioritizing all the little things. There's times when it's better to just step away and know and just accept I've done everything I needed to do. I can do more things if I move to do more things. If something strikes me as I'm really excited to make that change or tackle that project, then yeah, that's great to do. But there's not a thing that somebody else is doing that I'm not, or that you're not, or what, we're all doing enough, and just accepting that is a big hurdle to get past.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. So I have a business manager for William Kingsfield Publishers, and we get together once a week. We go through, whatever she's working on. She does things for me, like not only manages my finance, but also does things like if I have a book promotion coming out, she is responsible for marking the prices down on all the retail platforms, putting them back up when we're done. And she also goes through my P&L with me. And so we have my income broken out into certain areas, and they're basically like income from product, which is basically books, income from articles, income from speaking engagements, income from consulting, book formatting, which is something I just started for a particular person. And there are probably other categories, but I can't think what they are. And just recently, she said to me, most of these other areas of income, like speaking engagements, you're making money and you're hardly having to invest any money in order to get those opportunities. Certainly investing time, but not investing money. Like if you look across all of them, much more profit, I'm getting much more income than I'm having to pay for that income, except for income books, because, the ratio was way off. I was spending a lot of money, not only on editing and cover design and production costs and things like that, but on advertising. And she said, you have like this huge budget item for advertising and marketing that you don't have for any of your other items. And not that I couldn't have figured that out myself eventually, but it was really helpful to me as an indicator of where I was investing my time and my money, because I was putting as much time into this expense bucket as I was money. But having to talk about it with somebody it was really illuminating, having another pair of eyes on it.
Those kinds of things are fantastic because for that exact reason, we just do what we normally do and we don't question it because it's just what we've done. And anecdotally, I think a lot of authors just take ads. I'm going to use ads as an example, but take ads as the cost of doing business and just kind of shrug their shoulders at it and say, well, yeah, I'm never running ads. Well, I'm running a little bit on Amazon and I'm running a little bit on Facebook and I'm running a little on BookBub, but I really don't run ads. And I think we just kind of accepted that this is just the way it is. But when somebody else comes along and says, you're paying more in ads than you're paying for I'm editing or covers or formatting or whatever it might be, you start to realize, oh, maybe there's another place that I should be focusing my energy. And that's part of that working smarter thing, I think, is just having that other set of eyes to give us that little checkpoint. And I think recaps can do the same thing. I'm a big recap person, and sometimes I'll just get motivated like, oh, I want to look at my sales by book, by month for the history of time. And I'll do this recap and then I'll look at it and say, I did not realize that like book 7 of a series is performing way better than books 5 and 6 and 9. So I wonder why, like those little things stand out, which I think it's the same as having another person point something out to you and say, you're spending money here and you're getting your return over there. So those checkpoints, I think, are really valuable.
So do you have sort of a guideline for yourself when as a red flag for when your investment of your time, and we can focus on time since I think that's sort of at the heart of working harder and working smarter, when you're allocating in a way that you realize is not a smart way to go?
I think it's an interesting question because I think you have to be clear on what it is you're trying to get. And that sometimes answers that question, because if you're allocating your time on something to create a project or to market a project or to learn about the audience of that market, those are almost invaluable things. It takes time to find that information out, and you can make concrete decisions based on that time investment. Someone might think, I don't know if I should continue a series or not. And maybe the best way to know that is to write one more book in that series and really monitor the drop off. Does a new book revitalize a series, or did nothing happen? And so sometimes the time spent writing the book might tell you everything you need to know and allow you to move on from a project, or to know that a project is still viable. So I think everything we do should have a concrete goal attached to it. Is it to create something new? Is it to get data? Is it to understand future decisions? Or is it to find a new audience? So it might take a huge amount of time to recover a series, but that time might have an exponential effect on that series. And it might also fit better with other series that we've written. So then our brand is stronger. So then I think there's a ripple effect to those things. So I do think as long as we know why we're doing something, that helps inform how much time we spend on something. And that helps kind of knock out just busy, just like I'm busy. So clearly I'm working. I think that's the problem.
We'll talk a little bit about that trap of busy work.
The trap of busy work, I think, is that it's that mentality of checking things off of a list. Mm-hmm. And like I said, there's always another project to do, especially when we are in author communities, which are so supportive. We tend to hear other authors say they're doing something that we aren't doing. And of course, the knee-jerk reaction is, let me add that to my list. So when we have these lists and we're just trying to check off tasks, we don't give ourselves that ability to step away from the task and see if it's actually an important thing to do. So website updates, I know we've been talking, you had a recent episode about websites, and I think website updates are one of the things that fall into this because it can become a time-consuming project if you maintain your website yourself, because you can go in and you can start updating links and then changing, maybe making a cover tweak, or maybe changing up what your next new book. I don't know, websites seem to have tons of things you can do once you get in there and start doing them, or SEO. But when you look at it, you start thinking, I just spent like 7 hours updating my website. Is that really, what effect is that having? What if I had spent that 7 hours on creating a marketing campaign for my new book, or setting up Pinterest, or filming content for the rest of the month, or just a variety of other things? So you just kind of start to see, I'm just keeping myself busy because I feel like, oh, I just updated my whole website today. That was really productive. But was it productive? Like, how what did that really do for you? So I think that checking things off a list, which is so common in, some corporate jobs, is not necessarily the most productive thing to do when you're doing creative work, when you're doing work that supports your creative work.
Yeah. I think that the idea, another corporate concept of the minimum viable product is really applicable here, because I recently had a conversation with Pauline Wiles, who is helping me move my Matty Dalrymple and Indy Author websites off the Weebly platform, since Weebly is not going to be supported necessarily after the middle of 2025. And a lot of what I came away with the concepts with Pauline was that there were parts of the website I could just strip away. Like, I think there's this intrinsic sense that the more advanced you are in your author career, then obviously the more complicated your website is going to become, because you have so much more to offer. And for example, one of the suggestions she had is that I had one page for every book. And she said, at this point, just have one page per series. I was like, well, that will save me, 8 pages of maintenance.
Yes.
And I'm really finding that it's both, I think, working smarter and very satisfying to go through and say, nobody's visiting this page that segments out my books by geography. And it's a pain to have to remember to update that whenever something happens to one of those books, and just say, I'm going to just leave that behind when I make the transition. Yes. And I think that applies to anything. Like, do you have to do everything to the nth degree, or is a minimum viable product where you have something that's quality but basic? I'm trying to think of a good car analogy or something like that. Like, you don't need all the bells and whistles. You just need something that will reliably get you from point A to point B.
Right. I think it's very true. I know I went into my website recently and just looked at all the pages that were hidden pages that I had archived for some reason or the other. And I thought, I'm just going to delete these. It's been years since I did anything with them. And it felt so good to just wipe them, just blow them up and be like, I don't even have to think about that anymore. It's just gone. And that was a huge sense of relief, because it wasn't this someday I'm going to get back to those hidden pages by series, which I like the concept of, but it was a lot of work to constantly go in and say, what else can I add to this page for new readers so they have fun exploring this? And I wasn't doing anything, and I wasn't promoting it. So yes, it felt very good to eliminate some busy work that way.
Yeah, I'm the queen of spreadsheets, and I have I have one enormous spreadsheet that I have all my publishing information in. And every once in a while, I would think of a better way to do something. And so I would like mark a tab as old, and I would move it to the end of the
Yes.
spreadsheet. And then I didn't want to delete it because you never know. But then I realized that what I should be doing is marking when I did that. Like I marked this as
Yes.
old in 2021, and I haven't looked at it since. I'm pretty sure I'm never going to use it again. Just get rid of it.
Yes.
But I think the opposite of that, I just had this experience. This was painful. So I was updating the covers of my Lizzie Vallere thrillers. And normally if I go into KDP or Kobo or Google Play or whatever, I've queued up the non-vital changes I need to make. So as I was uploading the updated covers, I was also saying, well, I'll just like I have an addition to my author bio. So I'll make sure I've uploaded a copy with the new author bio, and my also by list has changed, so I'll update that. I was doing all those, and I got like almost all the way through. So it was, 4 books. Is that true? 5 books, 6 books, if you count the box set, across all the retailers and ebook, print, large print, audio, the whole 9 yards. So, everybody can do the math on that. I was almost done, and I realized that I hadn't updated the name of the cover designer on the copyright page. So at that point, I went in, I started doing that. Then, like, just in the process, I realized that at the end of some of the novels, I said the end. And at some of the novels, it said end of book, whatever. And I was like, ah! So I had to go. So I ended up, and it was a bear to try to keep track of all this. Like, I couldn't remember if I had updated the end of book 1 to say end of book 1 and so I actually polled a bunch of people about how they were doing this. I said, there's got to be a better way. Like, as much as I love spreadsheets, this is killing me. They said, no, and a giant spreadsheet is really the only way to do it. And so I did spend like almost a day just creating a new giant spreadsheet that replaced a bunch of other giant spreadsheets that said, I really have to have like the exhaustive list that has all the books, all the editions, all the retail platforms, and then all the changes I want to make. And I've just got to go through cell by cell and say, did I update the cover? Did I update the interior? Does the interior say the new cover designer name? And that was one where I thought, like, that was a painful day of work, but I do believe it's going to save me pain and heartache down the road. So that would be an example of where I think putting in the work is the smart thing to do.
I love spreadsheets, but it's funny. I'm very disorganized when it comes to tracking that kind of information. So I finally got a student 5-section binder, like spiral ring binder. And I just put a tab in for each of my series. And when I make a change, I just scribble the date and go like 8/31 updated covers on this series. And I do all the covers. So instead of doing the complete, you're batching everything and doing all the uploads at once, I kind of do like, it's cover time. So I reconvert all the books on vellum so they include the right cover. And I just do the monster task of checking off, I make a grid, I handwrite it because would be better if I did a spreadsheet, but I handwrite it with every book, every retailer, and I draw lines and I just check off when I've done completed that one and it's uploaded. So those are time consuming tasks. I sometimes do think, is there someone who's looking and saying, well, this copyright page of book 7 doesn't match the copyright page of book 2? And I don't know that our readers are even doing that. So I think that's something that we're thinking about more than, I don't know the effect that that's having a big picture other than us feeling satisfied that we've been consistent and professional.
Yeah, that is definitely something that if I know it's out there, it's going to pain me. And I almost have to just say, okay, I admit I'm not doing this for publishing business reasons. I'm doing this because it makes me crazy that 3 of the books say the end and 1 of the books says the end of book 3.
Yes. So, but again, that goes back to knowing why you're doing something. And that's a perfectly legitimate reason. But I think it helps to know that. So if you say, I'm doing this because it satisfies me, that's huge. I mean, that is a very viable reason to do something, especially in this journey, because so many things we're doing because I want sales or because I want visibility or because I want, whatever else it might be. So if it's because it makes me happy or because it makes me satisfied, that helps because that creates the energy that we then do more projects in, where we feel good about the project we put out. And I always say, if you feel good about the project you put out, the quality of it, you will promote it more. You'll want to tell more people about it. You'll be more willing to stand behind it. And that is what makes a difference with the performance of a product. If you feel a little like, I don't know about that, you won't tell everybody about it. And then the book won't do well because you're kind of like, there's something about it that you feel is less than. So I think anytime you do something that makes you feel better about the book, that's very worth it.
Yeah. And I think there's also the work that I just acknowledge is not having any business benefit, but I enjoy it, like book trailers as a perfect example.
Yes.
I just like making book trailers.
Yes.
And I'm sure that, I put in 100 hours making book trailers and it's resulted in 3 book sales, but I just enjoy it. So when I'm doing that, I just acknowledge that what I'm doing is like a fun hobby, not a reasoned business decision.
Yes. And that's, like I said, that's massive, because there are so many things that we have to do that we don't love doing, or that just fill the time. They're just like things we have to get done. Like formatting a book might not be the most exciting thing in the world, but we have to do it. So yeah, to have those things that we get excited about, like I get really excited when it's time to make a marketing campaign for a book, and I'll go into Canva and I will take a day or half a day and I will design a 2-month marketing campaign with daily graphics. And then I will rescale it for Instagram and rescale it for Pinterest. And, if I want to make some book teaser trailers, I will do those, make reels. So that's really fun to me. And I know that the value I'm getting a lot for me because it uses a different part of my brain, but it's necessary so that when I sit back down at the keyboard to write the next book, I'm energized because I have positive energy going about my projects.
Yeah, I think that you have a really good theme going here, which is that there's the direct output of what you're doing, and then there's the indirect output that maybe people are undervaluing.
Yes. Yes, I
And
definitely think that's wise to think about.
yeah. And something you had said earlier about there's just some things that we have to do, like book formatting. I think it's also the case that a valid way of working smarter is what are those things that you don't really have to do, and you can we've talked a little bit about the things that you don't have to be done at all, and then there are the things that you yourself don't have to do. And this whole like managing the finances of my publishing company was one of these things that not only was I didn't like it, so I was bad at it. It would, I'd make a mistake on one spreadsheet, and then it would spend like 4 hours going to try to figure out where that happened. And also, I left those really like feeling bad about myself and depressed and independent of what the actual data was saying. It was just, it just drained me to work on something that I didn't like and that I wasn't good at. And every dollar I pay to my business manager pays me back threefold because she loves this stuff. She's good at it, and she can show me the information I need to see. She never shows me the information I don't need to see. And so what are those things where you just say, you know what, it's just better. It is working smarter to have somebody else do this for me.
And that's a really that's a piece of advice that you hear so many successful business people, just all walks of life, saying is figure out what you are not good at and test those things out. Because if it's good to know everything that's involved in a business. So I'm a big proponent of learning every step so I know what to do. But if there's something that you recognize that you're not good at, it will be more effective to have somebody else do it. And it's hard. It's very hard for me. I'm a hands-on person. So I definitely want my hand in every pie. And I know there are probably things that would be better for me to hand off, but I that control aspect and but I can do it. That gets me in trouble sometimes because I don't often think about what I can task out. So yeah, you're doing a great job by tasking that out and recognizing that that's not your thing.
Yeah. That was an easy decision to make. There are other things that I think, oh no, I like doing this. I could do it. And I was like, no. Like I really shouldn't be trying to design my own book covers or whatever that might be. So I think we sort of talked about that topic of why doing nothing is sometimes better than doing something, but anything you'd like to add on that topic?
I do want to add something there. I think, we talked a lot about busy work, and busy work is that sense of satisfaction because we worked solid 8 hours or solid 10 hours or solid 12 hours. So clearly we're doing everything we need to do because we're filling our days. I have a habit of thinking I do believe I can solve any problem. So if I see that there's sales are lagging in a series, I think I can tackle that. I can figure out what to do. I can make changes. I can do something that's going to reignite that. But sometimes all we need to do is let it go. Just trust that we've done what we need to do. We've done our job. We put on the right cover. We had the book edited. We had the book proofed. We had it formatted. We wrote a compelling story. It's out there. It's going to sell. We just need to keep the engine going, write our newsletter, do our promotion, but there's nothing that needs to be fixed. So I think the working under the big umbrella of working smarter, not harder, I think recognizing that sometimes doing our job is not doing anything, just trusting and letting everything be instead of trying to fix things. So that's often challenging. And I think we even talked about like effective time off. It kind of dovetails into that a little bit, that sometimes stepping away is the best thing we can do for our business. Because again, that takes that need to micromanage everything away, and just walking away from a project gives it space to just do its thing. Like just again, trusting that we've done what we needed to do.
Yeah, I think that plays into the idea of when you choose to do something. So when you were saying about all those things that if you can feel good about the product you've put out there, the professionally designed cover, the great story, et cetera. And I'm kind of feeling that way about my fiction works at the moment, because I had this kind of steady upward trajectory of book sales for, many years. And then some of those were sort of based on Facebook ads. And then me and everybody else, evidently, the Facebook ads started tanking in like 2022, 2021, maybe. And, I've been trying various things since then to get the trajectory back up. And it is back up, but it's not, going up at the rate that I would like it. But I realized that maybe now is not the time. Like when I look across my P&L and I see the majority of my income is not coming from books, it's coming from these other things that I mentioned, that, those books are still going to be out there and they're still going to be just as good in 2 or 3 or 4 years. And maybe that's not where I spend my energy right now. Maybe I spend the energy on these other areas that are making me more money and that I also enjoy. I'm going to continue putting out books to, to the same level of quality, but maybe I just don't focus on the promotional aspect, knowing that I can always rev that up in the future. They're always going to be out there. They're always going to be making me a little bit of money. And maybe maybe in 2 years, there's going to be some social media platform that proves to be perfect for the audience that I'm trying to reach. And that's what is going to, make their trajectory go up again.
Absolutely. There's so many changes happening and we don't see them happening in real time, but we have the benefit of hindsight. And you think about how there have been trends of different book genres being hot. There have been trends of advertising, Facebook ads or BookBub ads or Amazon ads. BookBub featured deals, how they were easier to get when BookBub was first launching than they are now. They're so competitive. So there's so many changes that we could see, and we don't know what's coming along, and we don't know what books trends are going to be hot either. We don't even know how the retailer platforms are going to change. So just like things wax and wane in our current businesses with us putting money into things, you can come back and revisit things and ramp them up with different changes. And there might be a series that you wrote that's cooled off a little bit and a trend might come along and you might say, I have that covered already. Like this is the perfect time to like do a rebranding and get it out in front of this audience because it's a perfect match and it wasn't a perfect match 2 years ago. So definitely there's a time for everything. And those books are always, once you've written them, you have a body of work. I mean, we all have, if we've written consistently, we have that body of work that we can always, it's never going to go away.
Right.
It's there for us to support us.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to, even if you've kind of backburnered something like the promotion of my fiction books, to always have the antenna up to say, for your books, you have the series, the space series. So maybe some movie comes out that's sort of like the comp for your books.
Yes.
You could say, oh, well, this is going to be the perfect opportunity, because it's a great marketing option to say, oh, did you love blah, blah, blah? Then you'll love my space books. And so always keep an eye out, an ear out for those opportunities, but don't be kind of grinding away at it obsessively when it's not paying you back.
Right. Exactly. There's times for different things. There's times when things are hot and there's times when things are cool. And we also, once you have that body of work, you have the opportunity to leverage things differently. So I can take a book in the middle of a series that is set around a certain holiday and I can promote it around that holiday, when normally I don't I don't regularly promote backlist books except for book one. I'm always trying to get readers to find a series, but I can pull those random books out at different times of the year and run a little like 3-day sale or something like that, just because it fits. And those can end up finding new readers that then pick up the whole series also. So at any time you have the ability to do that. And like I said, once it's done, it's like you've got the body of work done. Now you can start to think creatively about how to promote it, what to do.
Yeah.
Or,
Or not to. Yeah, exactly.
or not to. Mhm.
An example of that in my own work is that I have a Ann Kinnear suspense short. So a full moon was coming up, and I thought, oh, a full moon, that seems like a good opportunity to promote a suspense series. And so I did a text search on all my Ann Kinnear books, and full moon was only referenced once, much to my surprise, in a book called Sea of Troubles. And so I thought, oh, this is good, because every time the full moon comes up, I'll say, hey, tomorrow night is the full wolf moon or whatever, and give like a little blurb about why it's called the full wolf moon, and said, are you looking for a short shot of suspense, to celebrate the full moon? Pick up the Ann Kinnear suspense short. And so I did that for, I don't know, probably a year or two. And it was just one of those things once a month that would come to the top of my tickler list. I put together the little social media thing and put it out there. And I just was on autopilot. And then after like 2 years, this is embarrassing to admit, but after a really long time, I was like, is this actually selling any books? Like, it would get likes and stuff on Facebook. But I went through and I said, is there any indication that sales of this short are spiking once a month? No, there is not. And you know what? So just stop doing that. And and the other thing is that I did it for a long time thinking, it only takes me a couple of minutes to put this post together, but the couple of minutes adds up. And I think that is a huge pitfall that people run into in terms of not working smarter, that thinking, oh, this is just going to take me a couple of minutes. And then there are 4,000 things like that are on your list.
Yes. I read a book recently, 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Accounts. I think I've mentioned this to you before.
Uh-huh.
And I did not, the quick answer is no, I did not delete all my social media accounts. But reading it made me realize how often I fill pockets of time with social media scrolling. So I took some steps to make it more difficult to just, pick up my phone or hop on the social media accounts and do those. Kind of like put a little blocker on, deleted some things from my phone. And I started realizing how much time I actually have. So just getting rid of, because 5 minutes turns into half an hour sometimes. And even, at night, I would check everything before I went to bed. And since I wasn't checking everything, I would pick up a book and I would read for a little bit longer. And I noticed my reading pace was picking up. So it's those little pockets of like 5 minutes, 10 minutes here and there throughout the day. When you can wipe those away, there's a cumulative effect of time. And you start realizing, I wrote more this month. My word count was higher and I read more books, and I'm feeling my brain is like waking up to like what I want to write next, or my plotting is kicking in, or whatever it might be. There's another effect of packing together all those little 5 and 10 minute and half an hour pockets of time. And you start realizing you feel a little bit more in control. Yeah. I know in my most frustrating times, when I'm trying to get in a new project and trying to squeeze every minute out of a day, I start to feel like I am not in control of my time. And I start to feel like there's so much to do. I can't do it all. I need to do more. And that becomes this oppressive feeling. But taking back control of the time and then starting to realize I have time. I have time to sit and watch a Phillies game. I have time to, sit down for dinner and like enjoy my food and not feel like I have to be doing something while I'm eating or whatever it might be. Those things, I started feeling like, wow, I'm not overwhelmed anymore. And I think that was a huge part of that working smarter, not harder. I was doing the same amount of work every day, but by eliminating other things that weren't really work, but kind of felt work adjacent, which was like, oh, I have to see if I got any likes, or I have to see if I have to respond to any comments, but kind of doing that in a pocket of like, I'm going to take 5 minutes and check Facebook and just respond. That kind of thing really gave me more power. And it gave me a better sense of like, I've walked away from work and I'm okay walking away from work. Like I've done what I need to do. I'm free for the night. Tomorrow morning when I sit back down, that's when I'm going to pick everything back up. And no, the sky isn't going to fall before tomorrow morning. And that was a huge thing. Just taking back that control.
Yeah. And what you're saying makes me think that this is a message that I don't think can be repeated too often. And that is that sometimes I'll hear writers say, I did such and it was free because I didn't pay any money for it. I avoided having to pay a proofreader because I read it myself. I just read every word backwards and it took me 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And whenever I hear that people are only ascribing value to money and not their time, it pains me because you've got to accommodate both. And I know when I was working in the corporate world, it was easy to do because there was some standard rate that you would assign to a resource. If you had a resource working on something for 100 hours, there's a standard hourly rate. And it was very clear. And I think people need to do something similar for themselves. And whenever I've suggested this, people say, oh, what's the number it should be? And I was like, it's really hard for me to say. But any number, I think, is better than no number. Like even if you assign yourself a buck an hour, which I think is hugely underrating people's value,
Yes.
but or you assign yourself $100 an hour, which may be like too enthusiastic. But I think any number you assign is valuable because at the end of the day, you can say, oh, I spent 8 hours doing that. And that kind of equates to this much money. And so if you think in terms of value, in terms of money, then it makes it easier to recognize that there's value attached to time as well.
I agree with you so much that cannot be said enough. I was talking to a local businessman and he said he was consulting with some people who had started up a business, and he asked them, what's the hourly value of your time? And they thought about it and they came back and they said $75 an hour. And he said, I think you're underestimating yourself, but let's go with $75 an hour. So how long does it take you to do this project? And they told him. And so he calculated it and said, okay, well, that's going to come to, I don't know, 275 or whatever it ended up being. Could you hire somebody to do that project for less than $275? And they were like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And it's exactly what you're talking about. And for me, my example was for the last several years, I've been publishing 3 books a year. And I kind of have it on a schedule of like the writing, then the revising, then the editing, proofread, and, send it out, and then the final read through. And that worked for me, but I have had books that I backed right up against my deadlines, and it was a little too close for comfort. So this past year, I just thought, how can I solve that problem? I'm going to change the level of editing I get. I'm going to book my dates differently, and I'm going to book the level of editing that I hire out. And by doing that, it allowed me to write more in 1 year. I fit in a novella and a short story and a nonfiction essay for another publication and another project that is, I don't know what's going to happen with it. But when I look back on my output, I think that's crazy that I wrote as much this year as I did, because it's so much more than I've written in other years. Just by hiring out the editors, I was able to free up my time, and I didn't feel like the proofing or the copy editing or all the revision. I was getting that feedback. It compressed that amount of time for me, and it allowed me, like, okay, I sent that off. My brain is free to do something else, and I was able to move on. So for writers, it might not always be an hourly. I mean, it can work out to an hourly, but if you think about how much do I make when I write a new book? And you start thinking, well, what do I generally make in a year? And then what does it cost me to publish that book? And subtract out the expenses and see that bucket of money, and then subtract out how many hours did you spend working on it? Or even, find a calculation to do that, because it may be that you can write a new book and it'll bring you a lot more money than taking that time to try to do that proofread by reading the book backwards, word by word. And I've heard that trick for proofreading also.
It's horrifying.
It is horrifying. And every time I think about it, I think I don't have the attention span for that. I would abandon that before I got to the beginning of the last chapter. But you just start to reframe how you're using your time, because you realize in a traditional publishing world, the author isn't doing every step. There are editors who are giving content feedback. There are editors who are doing copy feedback. There's proofreaders. So there's all those steps, and that frees time up from the author writing the book. And that's kind of why the pay structure is the way it is. So as an indie, we don't have to do all those steps ourselves. We have the ability to follow that same model and say, okay, I wrote a draft. Now I'm going to hire it out for feedback, or send it to trusted readers for feedback. And now I'm going to get a content edit. And now I'm going to get a proofread. But again, that just frees us up. The costs seem much less expensive when you start realizing what you could do in that time.
Yes, exactly. One of the other topics you had suggested for a conversation was you don't know what you don't know. What did you mean by that?
We think we know everything we have to do, but if there's something we're not doing, we really have no idea. And it sounds, when you say you don't know what you don't know, it sounds like a funny thought, but especially when you're starting out, if someone doesn't tell you a best practice, you have no idea that best practice exists. For all the books I've read in my life, I don't know that I ever realized that a break in the middle of a chapter, that there was that little extra bit of space, and that the new section started off with the small caps in some formatting or a drop cap. I never really registered that, because I never thought about books that I read from the side of how do you format a book. So like that was something that I thought, no, I never knew that before. Or if you want to apply for a Library of Congress number, how to do that, or just different things like that. If someone doesn't open your eyes to those things, you don't know that those are things that you can do and choose to do or not do. But it's really our choice what we end up incorporating in our journey. So I think that's where community comes into play, and talking to other, reading a lot, first off, I think is huge, because once you start writing, you start reading differently, and you start reading in terms of like, oh, I could do that. Or you even hold a book differently, or you look at an e-reader differently. I remember picking up I was using something to format my books, and I read somebody's book and I thought, ebook looks so crisp and clean. The formatting is great. And at the front, it said created by Vellum. And I thought, I don't know what Vellum is. Can I hire them? I didn't know, but that was how I figured out what Vellum was. And, so that became something I had no idea existed. And I was just trying to do my best job. And then I found this thing that saved me tons of time. So I think that's, always don't think you know everything, because there's something you don't know. And that's okay. That's good, because as you learn those things, you can get better and you can improve and you can save time. I mean, I think about the time I save by using Vellum versus the time I used to save doing it myself, and the better results that I'm getting also. So I think that's an important thing for people to think of in terms of working smarter and harder. I used to designate a day. Today, I'm going to format the print version of my book, and I would do it in Word, and it would take me 8 hours to do. But here's a tool that came along that just took that down to a couple of minutes, really, to be able to do that. So I think that's what I really meant by that, is knowing that there might be solutions out there that you don't know about. So don't necessarily think that you know everything of this journey.
I think that idea of community, it's such a double-edged sword, because I think the downside of community is that it is the source for people acquiring shiny object syndrome. And you hear that somebody is on TikTok, or you hear that they're killing it in BookBub ads, or you hear whatever. And you think, oh, I should be trying that. This person is trying it. I should be trying it too. And so the community offers like almost too many options. And yet I think the benefit is that if you look across your community, not for the menu of things that you should be doing, but for a pool of ideas, but also an illustration that not everybody is doing everything. So the person who is killing it with TikTok is not necessarily also killing it on Pinterest. And so just that recognition that these other people are not doing it all either. Even if they're trying to, they're not. And so you can use it as a gauge to assure yourself that you don't have to be doing it all either.
Yes, that's important to note, that no one's doing everything. Even the people who say they're doing everything, there's probably something. They either have help, which is a lot of people do, and that's great. But most people are not doing everything. But I think I would say for me, whenever I try something, I have one of two goals. I want to sell books or I want to learn something. And that's a really broad two options. But sometimes I will do something purely for that. Like, I don't know if this is going to work. I've heard other people say it works. I have no idea if it works for me. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to get results and then I'm going to make a decision. And so the value isn't, did I sell books or didn't I sell books? The value is, do I know if that's a worthwhile effort for me, or do I know it's not a worthwhile effort for me? And sometimes I find things and I say, that was great. Or I find things and I say, nope, not going to worry about that. And there's a huge value in being able to say, I'm not going to worry about that. Because, like we said, there's so many things to do. So when you have something that you can say, nope, that didn't fit my business plan, I feel good about not worrying about that. Then when you hear that, other people saying and doing it, you already know you tried it. It didn't work for you for whatever reason. Maybe you didn't get results, or maybe it was you just felt sleazy doing it. I mean, some people are really great at asking for reviews. Some people are uncomfortable asking for reviews. That's, you can try it. You can try to ask for reviews. And if you feel awful doing it, then you say, I did it. I know how I feel. I don't want to do that anymore. Or you can say, hey, I did it and I got 100 extra reviews. I'm doing that all the time. But you wouldn't know if you didn't try it. So I think this is why I go back to saying you need to know why you're doing everything. Because if you know, I'm going to do this thing, not for results, but just to know if I want to incorporate it in my plan, that takes a huge boulder off of the pressure of doing that thing. And it takes, removes that. And it just allows you to go into that like scientist mode of, did it work? Didn't it work? And then you can make a decision.
That makes me think of the importance of finding a community of people who share your goals, because I think there's a lot of conversation about the importance of finding a community of like genre writers, people who write in your genre, or other commonalities. But I don't know if there's a lot of conversation about finding a community of people who share your goals, because and I found this, that I ended up in a lot of online communities of rapid release authors. And without really thinking through it carefully, I started adopting the practices that were working for them. And these were a group of people who were rapid releasing because they had a goal of making book sales their primary or perhaps only source of income and making a living wage from it. And it wasn't until I became aware of this disconnect that I thought about it in a way that says, you know what, that theoretically, sure, but and I've mentioned this a couple of times recently in the podcast, when I looked at the actual decisions I made, it was clear that my underlying motivation was not to make enough money for my books that I could not, I could stop doing anything else. Because when I was faced with a decision, I almost always made the decision that didn't necessarily support, like if you put this kind of book cover on your books, you'll sell a lot of books, because people who read suspense want to see hands around a crystal ball. And I was like, maybe, but it's not really a hands around the crystal ball kind of book. So, that might have resulted in lots of sales, but I also think it would have resulted in a lot of disappointed readers when they found out what the book really was. So as a different example, my goal is definitely to find speaking engagements as a significant source of auxiliary income. So I want to surround myself with other people who are looking to make speaking engagements a significant source of auxiliary income, not people who are saying, oh, I occasionally like to go out and give a talk because there's a charitable organization that I want to spread the word about. Well, that's a great goal, but it's not my goal. And so I don't want to shun having community with that person, but I want to make sure I also have the community of people where my goals align with their goals, so that the advice I'm getting, the advice I can offer, is more in sync.
Yes. I think sometimes we feel the initial rush of joining an author community because it is great to have people to talk to about what we're doing. But what might happen is it might not be the right mix and it's not anything against any of the people involved, but the idea that different people have different goals. And so it's critical, you're right, to find people who have similar goals, because there's different strategies. I've joined lots of groups on Facebook, and what happens is sometimes the success that people are having is in on a path that isn't my path. And then it makes me start to question, well, do I need to chuck everything I've done and do what they're doing? But then I ultimately think, well, that doesn't align with my really big picture goals. So again, if you know your North Star, it helps you determine what fits and what doesn't fit. But you join a big community and you talk to a lot of people, you start to notice, oh, that person seems like they're doing what I'm doing. Or I had a good conversation with that person about, in-person events or speaking engagements. Maybe I want to reach out to them and see if they want to talk more about it. Because this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not like if you have success, then I'm going to fail. Anybody in writing, when you come together and share ideas, generally both people do better. Because and it goes back to that, you don't know what you don't know. But talking to somebody, you might learn something, they might learn something, you share those ideas, you have a small group that helps lift everybody up and everybody succeeds. So that's important, definitely.
Yeah. So I think this next topic is a great one to wrap up with, which is you probably know more than you think. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that's the other thing is with the community and with joining groups and asking advice and reading what everybody else is doing. And there are a lot of authors who are very generous with their anecdotal, I'm having this great success. Here's my screenshot of my sales. Here's what I did. The thing is, we already have an internal gauge because we've been doing this. We know what works. We know what we like doing. We know what we believe in. We've already studied a lot of this. And I don't know any writers who didn't start out as readers first. So before we even opened up a document to start writing chapter 1, we've kind of had a sense of storytelling and a sense of where we find books and a sense of like who recommended our favorite books to us or where we discovered them. We know all those things without having studied them. So it's easy to then automatically think, everybody knows more than me. I have to learn everything. I have to copy what somebody else is doing because they're having major success. But having that little checkpoint to say like, no, I know about this. I'm writing because I loved all these other books. Well, where did I learn about those other books? Oh, I learned either at this indie bookstore or at this big chain bookstore, or maybe I learned about them from my, like some other group that I thought had, my Dungeons and Dragons gaming group or whatever it might be. I don't play D&D, so I don't know why I just pulled that reference. But you don't know where you found it. You do know where you found these things, but we sometimes don't trust that. We have a default of thinking somebody else has the answer. And I think sitting back and saying like, I do know, I have a brain. I can figure things out. I know where people find books, or I know I could talk to this person or whatever it might be. Just acknowledging that you're not starting at ground zero. You're not starting in a vacuum with no knowledge. And think about how much we do know before we start adding on what everybody else is telling us to do, because we might be able to come up with the perfect business plan for us, and it might not work for anybody else, but it will work for us. And that's hugely valuable and not to be discounted.
I think that's probably the best tip for working smarter, is that I think a lot of people have the default reaction of what they're doing must be better than what I'm doing. And stepping back and saying, maybe what you're doing is just fine. and sticking with that is the smart thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Diane, as always, it is always lovely to chat with you about these mindset topics. And please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
I am still active social media on Facebook, Instagram, and I'm starting up again with Pinterest. And occasionally I hop on YouTube to do something. And my website is dianevallere.com. So you can always find out more about my books. And I have a weekly newsletter that I send out called The Weekly Diva, which is DI from Diane and VA from Valere. That's where the diva comes from.
Nice. Well, thank you so much.
My J-Lo name.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. That is working smarter. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Diane. Where do you come down on the working harder, working smarter question? Are there important questions to ask oneself when assessing one's work that Diane and I didn't cover? I would love to hear your thoughts. Just leave a comment on YouTube. If you were intrigued by Diane's discussion of vellum, I would love it if you would consider checking it out via my affiliate link at theindyauthor.com/affiliates. And if you'd like to hear more from Diane and another recent guest of the pod, Dale L. Roberts of Self-Publishing with Dale, tune into a recent episode of the Self-Publishing with Ally podcast to listen to them talk about how to engage readers without selling out, and you'll find a link to that in the show notes as well. And if you got value from this episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Matty a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.